Hey friends, welcome to the channel. I'm Ken Smith, an old guy having fun with trains, and I am changing the backdrop that I just got done painting, and I'm going to show you exactly what I'm going to do to, I think, improve the overall aesthetics of the layout and the backdrop. So let's get at it. Now, in my last video, I showed you how to paint clouds and kind of transition things up. You'll notice that this black line now appears, and the reason why it appears is because I'm using styrofoam to kind of condense and compress my scene. I don't have a lot of area to work with, and I'm trying to model an 1890s era railroad in what looks like it's going to be going through the Rocky Mountains, and so I had to do a lot of compression and a lot of thinking. But after I put all of this styrofoam up in places throughout the layout, I realized really quick that clouds alone wasn't going to cut it. And I like the clouds, and I'll put a link down in the description of the clouds that we created a video. But I decided I'm going to white or blue everything out essentially and start painting some scenes. And so this is literally just a little bit of an experiment. I took a very dark brown, almost like dark chocolate. And I found a gallon of it at the big box store that was a mix paint, whatever you want to call it. It was 15 bucks a gallon, and I'm like, I can't buy a gallon of paint for that color. But it was super dark, and I thought, well, it'll look really great for all of the final masonite style or masonite type fiberboard that sits in the front of the layout, and for the valance. But the more I looked at it, I'm like, well, if maybe I start doing some mixing. I used to do some oil painting every now and then, and if I do some mixing, maybe I can come up with a couple of different colors. And so I actually came up with this color that you see right in there, and mixing it with some white and some gray and some red, and I kind of came up with a brown that was acceptable, but I thought, I want to try to get it a little bit lighter, and so I did a wet on wet technique right here. I used a little bit of gray paint, and after I brushed in the brown area, I just kind of went over it with a little bit of gray and kind of dabbed it off. And this gives me some layers and some shadows that I really started to like. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow that line all the way across and kind of give me a little bit more distance. And then our clouds obviously are not going to be as puffy and as bright as that you see right there. We're probably going to make them a little less bright and noticeable, so that there'll be something along the lines of that right there. So that's what our plan is going to be. We're going to get at it right now. In order to accomplish this, I want to use essentially two different brushes, one for the darker brown paint and one for the whiter paint that we're going to kind of blend in. So I already know how and where our foam mountains are going to be sitting. So the goal here is to try to add some depth, and so by adding some depth, just kind of put our mountains in like so. If you take your brush and just tap along the very tops, this can kind of simulate some jaggedness and some trees off in the distance. And I just want to go just below the marker line. That's really all I want to do. So I just want to go below the marker line. Once I'm past the marker line, there's really no need to go any further. And we're going to try to blend this all in. You can kind of see by doing something like that, that kind of puts that mountain now off in the distance. And so again, maybe adding a little bit of white to this. Just kind of feathers in our mountains a little bit. This also gives me some ridge lines, some shadows. I really like how that comes out, and quite honestly, I can really live with this. This is actually kind of really enjoyable. There's just enough separation in there. I think that this is actually gonna, this is an experiment literally live. I mean, I'm actually quite impressed with how that kind of has come out, and this gives me a little bit of layer. So we're going to add maybe some more mountains in the background, kind of. Again, just doesn't necessarily need to go along the line. In fact, actually, I think that adding some you're not making teepees, so don't try to make teepees. They're mountains. The idea here is to give you some ridges off in the background, and that's it. We're not making teepees. Your mountains don't look like teepees. So don't do that. And then again, I'm just going to add a little bit of white, right, that was on that brush to begin with. If I let those lines just intersect each other, this gives me some depth. I really like how that's looking. Probably almost got too much paint on my brush here, so we may end up adding a little bit of brown just to that's almost, there we go. Maybe a little more jagged there at the very top. Yeah, there we go. Let's add just as my wife would say, a titch of brown. We'll just add a little bit of brown to this, just kind of give it a little bit of darker color, and there we go. A little darker color. Again, just some nice transitions right in there. And I think it's okay if we have a little bit of bleeding in there. What say you? So next, what I'm going to use is what they call a fan brush, and I just mixed up some green paint that I had, and I'm just going to really do a lot of dry brushing and dabbing. So we'll come over here. I'm going to try and hold this still while I get in here and just put in some trees. Now, they don't have to be very tall, and we're just dapping. Now, the nice thing about the fan brush is that it almost invariably will give you some straight lines if you just take a little time and practice. Now, you don't need an awful lot, And if you do it in between layers, like you see right there, we've got some kind of, you know, nice looking, realistic trees that, as the paint kind of thins out a little bit, you'll see kind of different shades. Pull that back a little bit. And we just added yet another layer of texture to our mountains without really spending an awful lot of time. Well, I've started actually painting some clouds. And so with this technique, I'll try to stay out of the shadows as much as I can. I'm actually doing a lot of dry brushing. So you can see there's barely any paint on the brush. And so I'm going to go ahead and try. I've got a very bright light here because I want to see what I'm doing, obviously. But I also want you to see too. So just with a little bit of dry brushing, I'm going to just kind of add some clouds. Now this is not a wet on wet technique like I had in my other video. This is actually dry brushing, and so the technique is a lot different as far as mixing color and blending it all in. We want to dry brush, and so a little bit of paint is all you need. Too much paint and it's going to look like you're coloring or painting the entire wall. We don't want to do that. So that's dry brushing, and that's literally, this probably looks a lot brighter than it really is. And obviously the paint is wet. I almost think I have too much paint there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try and smooth this out even more and just kind of really try to blend this in. And that's okay. Now the rest of my work is already, yeah, that's a lot better now. Those clouds have a little bit of a tail to them. You can see once this dries, that'll look really, really nice. Ultimately, there's no right or wrong way to paint a cloud. And when you use different brushes, they're going to create different brush strokes. That's just the nature of how brushes work. And so I think the goal when you're trying to paint some clouds is really try to give yourself a little bit of freedom, and you definitely want to make sure that your clouds all don't look the same. And so keep that in mind as you're doing. I'm showing you a couple of different brushes here. Here's another brush. All right, so you can kind of see the difference here. Now, if I do this brush, this is really good for drawing or painting nice straight lines. Look at that line. See that? Okay, so we have a nice straight line that you see right there. And I can, from there, I can take that line and maybe fade it out a little bit. What if we want to add a little bit of color to this cloud? Okay, it almost looks like it's too flat. So what I may end up doing, and in fact, we'll just do it here right now, is just maybe just kind of a little bit of edge, there we go, kind of like your mountains. You don't want to make clouds that look like triangles, okay? So try to be a little bit offset. There we go, something like that. Okay, that looks a little bit more realistic. You notice that we have some light clouds right here in the distance. This is a lot of dry brushing technique that A great way to practice your dry brushing is just on a piece of cardboard, like a cardboard box. And that gives you a little background that you can paint on and whatnot. And that can give you a little bit of dynamic and interesting variations in your cloud work. Now this brush has kind of a slightly rounded tip, and we'll put a little bit of paint on here. And what we can do with this is just kind of add, notice how the brush strokes are different. Okay? Do you see that between the brushes? And this is just a really great way to add differences, some textures, and whatnot to your cloud base. A little bit maybe more control. You know, we can tap this out a little bit further. That's certainly an option. We can add a little bit more paint. That gives it a little bit more thickness. If we wipe off our brush and we just add a little bit of maybe some gray to it, some gray tones. There you go. And if that's a little bit too harsh, well, we can just come right back over it and just kind of blend that all in. And we've got subtle color variations in our clouds. Just like that. So what I want to do is add a little bit of variation to this cloud. Now, I did some dry brushing on this cloud last night, but I want this cloud to have a little bit more substance to it. And so I'm just using some artist brushes. You don't need super expensive artist brushes. But this gets me just a little bit more. I think I'm actually going to make this cloud a little bigger. And there we go. And we just made a cloud look a little bigger by adding some dry brushing and just like that. Maybe some little bit of cloud right there. When you're using small brushes like this, it's really easy to just add just a little bit of variation and some texture. We've got just a few nice little clouds, nothing big, nothing fancy. Happy little clouds is what we got right there. And again, I'm just using a little bit of paint. Don't need a lot. I'm actually going over some areas that I dry brushed yesterday and adding a little bit more detail. Not much, just a little bit. And we've got a little bit of variation in some clouds, and that's really, we don't need a lot of paint. We don't need a lot of extra stuff. Sometimes it's like Brill cream, you know, a little dab will do you. Kind of smooths out some of our other, you know, brush strokes, and you know, and if you don't like what you ended up doing, I mean, you've got blue paint, just paint over it and do it again. Really not, I don't think it's really that big of a deal, but you can see how easy it is just to even add a few small clouds. Again, it's really not that big a deal. There's all types of clouds that are in the sky. Remember to check out my video on how I did clouds, but you can definitely see how we added depth with a mountain off in the distance and a little bit of snow and just a little bit of grass right there, and maybe some trees off in the distance, to a mountain a little bit closer right here. And it's in front of this little mountain. These are probably more like foothills, but you can see that the vegetation, the trees, they've gotten bigger. You can see over here that, again, we're kind of trying to show distance. So we got a mountain off in the distance, a little bit of snow up here, and then there's another range right here, and then there's another range right there. And so again, all of these different variations. Now, remember I told you this is a very compressed scene. I'm only 24 inches from that wall to the essentially where the camera is, and so we're going to have an elevated track. I'll get you down here a little bit further. So to give you an idea, we're going to have 3% grade that's running almost right up against this. So this is very compressed. There'll be some rock work and whatnot that we carve into the styrofoam. But if we stand back a little bit, you can kind of get an idea of how this really looks. And that's our goal, is to just kind of give some depth, some forced perspective, and make it fun and make it easy. That's literally how we did an entire backdrop, and honestly, we did it in just about 9.5, 10 hours. So a long day, if you will, between filming and whatnot, but about 9.5 to 10 hours, and that was painting everything, including repainting the clouds out. Really easy to do. It's not hard. Give it a whirl. You can do it. Have a wonderful day, and you all be blessed.